realize that I'm a little late, but I really wanted to wait until the entire first season was released before making a video about Velma. I like to have the full picture, and while initially I was just as ready as everyone else to hate this show when the first 2 episodes were released back in January, I'm really glad that I decided to wait and give it a fair chance. Does it mean that I liked Velma though? No. Definitely not. But as the motivations of the characters and the plot get more fleshed out, it's easier to ignore the elements that simply aren't working, or at least to get used to them enough to continue watching without cringing every 10 seconds. That said, Velma has some fundamental issues that make it difficult to stomach, and the hate it received is honestly understandable, especially if you take into consideration that a lot of animated shows with a much better premise were either cancelled or never made it past the pitching stage. It's increasingly more and more difficult to find good projects that are guaranteed to get more than a season or two, and animation fans and creators are left with unfinished projects that had to be abandoned without reaching a proper conclusion. With shows like The Owl House or The Inside Job getting cancelled, it's difficult to root for a project that doesn't take itself seriously and has no redeeming qualities that would keep the viewers invested in the characters or storylines. And that's kind of the problem. Velma lacks the elements that would make the audience invested in how things are going to play out. It also does a really poor job making us root for Velma as a character, and instead it undermines her time and time again and goes out of its way to paint her as not only a bad person but also a bad friend. And when I say that it goes out of its way to prove it, I really mean it. And it's kind of bizarre too, because other characters such as Daphne, Fred or Norville actually get more sympathetic as the time goes on. But each time Velma seems to learn a lesson, she doubles down on being a jerk like 5 minutes later, basically reversing any character development that she could have had. I would have been more forgiving towards this show if it showed Velma as a genuinely insufferable and horrible person and had her slowly grow and become better throughout the length of the season. But it doesn't happen. I mean, the show kind of tries to act like it does, but at the end, we end up in the same place we started in, and it feels like Velma didn't learn a single thing, because the narrative rewards her for her bad behavior. I am not opposed to watching shows with morally grey or even straight up evil characters, but I would argue that Velma's biggest issue as a protagonist is that she's not entertaining, and that's a pretty difficult issue to move past. The reason why we watch TV shows in the first place is because we hope to be entertained. We want to be immersed in the story and follow the protagonist as the events of the plot unfold. And no amount of self-aware humor is going to make up for it, especially if it doesn't have anything smart, insightful or funny to say. The humor in Velma has been criticized a lot, and for a good reason. I can recall maybe 2 scenes that actually got a chuckle out of me, and for a show that calls itself a satire, that's practically nothing. It relies on the kind of self-deprecating and shocking humor that isn't really doing it any favors, and most of the time it's just the characters stating the facts in a way that's supposed to be sarcastic, or making meta jokes and references related to pop culture and the source material. Not only is this not funny, it also feels very patronizing, like the show doesn't trust its audience to understand the joke or notice obvious tropes or references. It uses gratuitous amounts of swearing, violence, sexual themes and drug use, and plays these serious subjects for laughs. And while I will be the first person to admit that it's simply not the kind of humor that I enjoy, I think the issue goes far beyond my personal preferences. Velma's biggest issue really seems to be that it has no direction, and what I mean by that is that at times it doesn't seem to know what it wants to be, or even who it is for. I have absolutely no idea who is supposed to be its target audience. It's certainly not the fans of the original Scooby-Doo cartoons, as it removes all of the elements that made the source material interesting, fun, or charming, and it doesn't offer anything of substance to make up for it. When it comes to reboots of popular franchises, there's often this expectation that there'll be a love letter to the original, bringing back the elements we used to know and love and giving them some kind of modern spin. And at least according to Charlie Grandi, the executive producer of the show, that's what Velma was supposed to be. In an interview, Grandi said, "It was actually part of the pitch that we wanted it to be a love letter not just to Scooby-Doo, but also to the current iteration of teen dramas, which have really pushed the envelope and been at the forefront of diverse casting and telling new stories that have been taboo in the past." The problem is, the show really doesn't get this point across, and instead many fans felt like it spits on the source material and dances on its grave. I wouldn't even say that this reboot actively hates the Scooby-Doo franchise. I think that would be giving the show way too much credit, but it clearly approaches it with this sense of superiority because it's so much funnier, edgier and more adult than the original. And I have no idea why, because it really has no reason to feel superior. especially since Scooby-Doo is a beloved franchise that was part of a lot of people's childhoods. Even though it was silly or goofy at times, there's a lot of nostalgia that's obviously going to make some fans feel defensive and protective over the older versions of these characters. And instead of taking these pre-existing characters and plots and doing something interesting with them, Velma almost seems to be mocking the original. It doesn't offer any commentary on other Scooby-Doo shows, and while it points out tropes and character archetypes, it does so in a way that's painfully obvious at best and mean and obnoxious at worst. Velma very clearly tries to imitate the success of shows like Harley Quinn the animated series, but the thing about Harley is that it's a very deliberate parody created by people who seem to have a lot of love and affection towards the media they are taking inspiration from, with lots of nods to the comics and genuinely unique characterization of well-known characters. It takes characters like Joker and turns him into a suburban dad without losing sight of who he is as a person. It works because it's so absurd and unexpected you can't help but go along with it. Moreover, Harley Quinn is a villain, and the show puts a lot of care into shaping her into a very complex character who experiences lots of growth as the story progresses. She actually learns from her mistakes, and at the end of season 3 she's more of an anti-hero than a villain. She also deeply cares about Ivy and her team, and that's what makes this show very compelling. This deep devotion to her teammates and genuine character growth makes her easy to root for. The show allows her to be vulnerable at times without compromising the fact that she's still very much a bad bitch who will fuck you up with her butt if you mess with her. This is the kind of approach that creators of Velma would have really benefited from. It feels like it's supposed to be a parody, but the characters have so little in common with their previous versions and lack any charm or competence that would make up for it. Instead, we got a protagonist who criticizes everyone around her for being shallow, unsupportive and cynical, while exhibiting all of these traits herself. She's selfish and judgmental, and she expects everyone and everything to cater to her needs. Her treatment of Norville is genuinely rage-inducing at times, even though he's nothing but supportive and even sacrifices his relationships with others in order to help her whenever she needs it. When he eventually moves on from his toxic obsession with her and lands himself a girlfriend, Velma finally realizes how important he was to her. But instead of appreciating him and apologizing for treating him like her personal driver / punching bag, she doubles down and demands that he ignores his girlfriend and dedicates all his time to her. I really can't emphasize enough just how unlikable she is, and how even when she's right, her attitude undermines it every single time. She takes everyone for granted and is obsessed with this idea of solving the mystery of her mother's disappearance, no matter how many people she hurts in the process, even if it's the same people who offered their help and were there for her. It's almost fascinating how the show rewards her for her abusive behavior in the end, acting like there's no need for her to improve because she was right all along. The show also suffers from a pretty major issue with telling instead of showing when it comes to Velma's intelligence. We are constantly being told by Velma herself that she's smarter than those shallow teens she's surrounded with, and that she's some kind of genius mystery solver. And okay, I would be willing to believe her. Based on the evidence though, it doesn't seem to be true at all. When her mother suffers from amnesia and her only hope of restoring her memories is to keep her happy for the next 72 hours, Velma forces Norville to make a fake report card for her because her grades are so bad. And while she turns out to be right about the fact that her mom was kidnapped, a lot of the heavy lifting that results in finding out the truth is done not by Velma, but by the supporting cast. Most of the clues that lead to her eventually solving the case are revealed by accident, discovered by other characters, or handed to her on a silver platter. Velma herself does very little other than obsessing over the case and being horrible to her friends. She also has a really nasty tendency to accuse others without having solid proof and only admitting to making a mistake when it's undeniable that she was wrong. I think in any other type of story I wouldn't have that big of a problem with the protagonist being incompetent, but if your show is a mystery and your protagonist is supposed to be this brilliant detective, I think you should actually put some effort into portraying her as being good at this stuff. Especially if she actually has a strong and believable motivation, like solving the mystery of her mother's disappearance. She's shown to be the only person who actually cares about solving this case, so why does everyone else end up doing all the hard work? And then there's also the issue with the way the mean girls characters are portrayed. I mean, yes, Velma is entirely in her right to dislike them for the way they constantly mock her for her appearance. However, rather than make them actually unlikable and vile people, the show portrays them as surprisingly self-aware, and they are quick to defend Daphne, Velma's supposed best friend, when Velma reads her diary to the entire school and tries to shame her for her struggles with mental health. They actually make some valid points, and one thing I haven't seen discussed much before is how at some point Velma tries to uglify them because of some plot-related reasons, and in the end they stand up for themselves and assert that they actually enjoy being seen as attractive.
You think every girl deep down is like you, but you're wrong. In fact, your definition of womanhood is even more restrictive than ours.
In a better show that's more focused on actual social commentary and not constant pop cultural references, that would have been a really great point. Velma seems to feel a sense of superiority over them, because unlike them, she doesn't pay attention to those silly, vain things such as looks or makeup. You see, she's not like other girls, she's better than that. Throughout the series, we see Velma showing so much contempt towards Daphne and her hot friends, and a lot of the time it comes off as her being pissed that they dare to be hot and comfortable with the way they present themselves, rather than, disliking them simply because they are assholes who enjoy bullying her. Like, she quite openly slut-shames them, and I was actually happy when they call her out and assert that there's nothing inherently wrong with wearing makeup or revealing clothing. It's natural that what some people will find restrictive, others will see as empowering. Different people have different needs, and no one deserves to be ashamed of who they are and how they choose to express themselves. But if it's the kind of message that has to be spelled out to you by the show's antagonist, maybe you're doing something wrong. Velma isn't any better than the people she criticizes by expecting other women to share her personal values and trying to dictate how they should express themselves. It's actually a really good and valid message that I wish was explored a little more, or that Velma actually internalized this lesson instead of immediately going back to her slut-shaming ways in the next episode. So as you can see, even though everyone in the show is unlikable in one way or another, Velma is easily the worst, if only because she refuses to compromise and is always first to poke holes in other people's plans. She has no consideration for others and their feelings, and expects things to be handed to her because she's smarter than everyone else in the room. What's worse is that the show keeps undermining her intelligence by constantly showing that she rarely thinks things through or bothers to gather the evidence necessary to back up her claims. At one point, Gigi accuses her of never appreciating Norva's friendship enough and rightfully calls her out, and Velma just dismisses it, saying she has no time and leaves. It's infuriating to watch, and what's even more bizarre is that she realizes her mistake and reflects on her treatment of Norville like 3 minutes later for absolutely no reason. Like, completely unprompted, she just starts listening to all the voice messages that Norville left for her during the last 2 years, and it's implied that it makes her see their relationship in a completely new light, to the point where she seems to develop romantic feelings for him, even though she's already crushing on Fred and Daphne. Because of things like that, the whole show comes off as poorly structured, and the characters seem to have no internal motivations and instead keep doing whatever the narrative needs them to do at the time. It's very confusing is what I'm trying to say. And this lack of consistency really makes it impossible to like Velma, or even to root for her to become a better person, something she clearly has no interest in doing. And the supporting cast isn't much better, although I have to say that I actually found myself enjoying some of them in the end. Fred in particular turned out to be the highlight of the show for me, and his character journey was actually interesting. He turned out to be shockingly competent for a minute there at the end when he tried to stop his mother. The battle didn't last more than 1 or 2 minutes, but hey, we can have it all. Fred was always depicted as a very I drink respect women juice every morning type of character, and I felt like the idea of giving Velma's Fred a kind of feminist spin while still maintaining his entitled and privileged attitude had potential to be really funny. He's the only character that I actually felt sorry for, as it's very clear that his parents were abusive and the wealthy lifestyle they provided crippled him in a pretty significant way. Fred is also the only character out of the main cast who has a well-defined character arc and actually seems to grow over the course of the season. He comes to the realization that his parents were bad people and tries to move on. Unlike other characters, his character growth isn't immediately reversed, which easily makes him more likable than others. I also feel like the writers tried to do something with Daphne by giving her this whole looking for her birth parents angle, but I personally found the storyline to be quite boring and felt like its main purpose was to cause conflict between her and Velma and give her something to do when she wasn't needed for the main storyline. Still though, I enjoyed her much more than I did Velma, maybe because I'm weak for these mean girl character archetype, and I wish they explored this aspect of her character a little more. I found it interesting that her friendship with Velma ended because Velma assumed that now that Daphne got hot, she's going to abandon her in favor of her more attractive and popular friends, even though Daphne herself never intended to do that. That's the kind of spin on this character archetype that had a lot of potential, so it's a shame that it wasn't explored more. I also have to say that I have absolutely no idea where Daphne's attraction to Velma came from, and the show does a really poor job explaining it. I'm not opposed to this ship, really. Two jerks in love feels like a match made in heaven, but I feel like it came out of nowhere, and the only logical explanation I can see is some kind of toxic attachment mixed with nostalgia. In fact, it's really baffling how Daphne, Fred, and Norville all end up having romantic feelings for her at one point or another, even though she consistently hurt and rejected all three of them, accused them of things they didn't do, and manipulated them. Velma is constantly portrayed as a horrible friend who expects Daphne to be there for her whenever she needs her, but never does the same in return, even when Daphne practically begs her for her help. Their relationship, as well as Velma's relationship with Norville, seems to be going in circles, with both of them dropping everything to help Velma, only for her to dispose of them the second they are no longer needed. It's hard to root for a relationship if at the back of your mind you're constantly like, could they be any worse for each other? And speaking of Norville, I really wanted to root for him. As opposed to Velma, he clearly has some redeemable qualities. His relationship with Gigi was surprisingly wholesome at times, and I was actively hoping that he'll finally realize how unfair Velma's treatment of him really is. And it kind of happened, but it felt like too little too late, especially since it cost him his relationship with Gigi, and it didn't even last a full episode. His obsession with Velma, just like Daphne's, is never explained. They are both attracted to her just because the plot says so, and it reflects badly on both of them as a result. At some point, Velma accuses Norville's father of being the serial killer, all based on circumstantial evidence, and she doesn't even have enough decency to inform Norville about what she discovered. Instead, she sends a fully armed police squad after his father that ends up destroying his home. And when it gets revealed that it was just a misunderstanding, Velma tries to act as if she did nothing wrong, and eventually it makes Norville snap at her and end their friendship, only to forgive her in the very next episode because she, cried a little, attempted to emotionally manipulate him, and actually listened to his voicemails. I mean, I realize that teenagers are known for being rather unstable when it comes to their romantic feelings, but this was a bit much. Gigi was the only character that I actually enjoyed watching, and I think it's telling that the most likable character is also the one who wasn't part of the original Scooby Gang. She's also deeply flawed, but I found myself sympathizing with her, and throughout the series she makes some really good points about Velma and her relationships with others. She also feels the most like a real person rather than an exaggerated caricature of a teenager who only exists to push the narrative forward and drop some unrelated to anything meta jokes. Her presence was quite refreshing, and she's probably the only character who managed to make me emotionally invested in her journey. She was the voice of reason this show desperately needed. All in all, the characters are easily the weakest aspect of the show, and the main reason why everyone seems to be so upset with its existence. It took beloved characters and turned them into unrecognizable assholes who share no similarities whatsoever with their original counterparts. It simply doesn't work as a darker, more satire-focused version of Scooby-Doo that it tried to be, because it fails at understanding what made these characters so popular and loved in the first place. I have to admit though that animation in Velma is actually really good, especially for an adult cartoon, as they tend to have simple character designs and mostly rely on situational and verbal humor. The hallucination sequences in particular are very visually creative and fun to look at, using bold colors and textures to create this atmosphere of body horror straight out of a nightmare. This is the kind of creativity that I love to see in cartoons, and one of the reasons why I will always see animation as the best medium when it comes to storytelling. It's quite unusual to see adult animation pull this much effort into the way it's animated, and I would love to see more of that in the future. Animation in Velma is quite smooth and character designs are pleasant to look at. I've seen some people claim that they are ugly, but I've actually never felt that way, and I think it's kind of a shame that people are willing to overlook the aspects of the show which are genuinely good, even if it's true that they are few and far between, and will drag it down no matter what just for the sake of complaining. Like, Come on, let's give some credit where it's due, okay? I actually find Velma's design to be quite cute, and I really like the way Daphne looks. It's a fun combination of her designs from other Scooby-Doo iterations while still giving her a unique spin. One thing that I really liked about Velma is that it takes a full advantage of its medium. There are a lot of scenes where the animators use it very exaggerated and caricature-like portrayals of characters to convey what they are feeling, and 9 times out of 10 they are funnier and more creative than forced pop culture references spit out by the characters every 30 seconds. I actually think that if Velma leaned more into this kind of comedy and prioritized the creative use of the medium they are working with, the whole show would be so much better, and it would have been so much more effective than a constant stream of film-related jokes and references that make no sense in relation to the story and its characters. It would also work so much better as a reboot, as old Scooby-Doo TV shows relied heavily on goofy and cartoonish sequences. I'm of the opinion that subtle visual notes like that work much better as references to the source material than some of the jokes like a brain-swapping program called Scooby. Some of them felt incredibly forced and like the creators have no faith in their audience's intelligence and don't trust them to recognize these references unless they spell them out for us. I think the voice acting was also mostly okay. I didn't enjoy Mindy Kaling's performance as Velma. I feel like a lot of her lines lacked authenticity or any real effort. I mean, just listen to this.
Oh God, look at his eyes! He's hypnotized!
But other than that, I think most of the voice actors did a pretty good job. They weren't exactly given the kind of material that would allow them to deliver better performances than what we got, and they can be blamed for that. There were also some creative elements that I personally liked, like previously mentioned hallucinations or the opening sequence with photographs depicting scenes from previous episodes, as well as all the clues displayed on the board. It's a fun visual representation of the genre and a great way to summarize what happened before without losing too much time. As for the story itself, I can say that the mystery of Velma's mother's disappearance was very engaging, but it also wasn't that bad. I just couldn't really bring myself to care, and I actually accidentally spoiled myself that it was Fred's mom who was behind all this. I think I would enjoy it more if Velma was more active as a protagonist and actually got a chance to show us how smart she is instead of relying on others. The most she does is an internet search and connecting the clues which were given to her by other characters who happened to have the information she needed. Overall, I don't feel like Velma is worth even a fraction of the hatred it received. I mean, is it bad? Yes, it is, no arguments there. But does it deserve the title of the worst cartoon ever made? Not really. I've definitely seen worse in my 28 years of living on this planet. I understand how its existence might be upsetting for the old fans of the Scooby-Doo franchise. I think these are all very valid reasons not to watch the show, and you won't see me recommending it to anyone, not even for hate-watching purposes. One thing that I also wanted to mention is that I'm really not impressed with the gratuitous nudity visible in the very first episode of the show. As an adult, it's something that leaves a very bad taste in my mouth, especially since it serves absolutely no narrative or creative purpose. Inclusion of these scenes feels like a desperate attempt at showing that, hey, it's edgy, it's adult, it's not for everyone. And it sets a precedent for the entire season. It tries so hard to be the sweetie commentary on social issues and TV writing, but it doesn't know how to incorporate these elements in a natural way that would fit the characters. And that's possibly one of the biggest issues this show has, as it doesn't seem to decide what it wants to be and what kind of story it wants to tell. You can have it both ways. You can't depict Velma as this abused and misunderstood underdog who's genuinely passionate about solving mysteries and is being mistreated by everyone around her, and simultaneously portray her as a deeply unlikable person who's mean, judgmental, and painfully self-centered. There's a huge difference between characters who have realistic flaws and can be unpleasant because they feel vulnerable or threatened, and someone who's constantly snarky, sarcastic, and won't hesitate to throw everyone else under the bus just because they can't admit that they made a mistake. In the end, Velma's horrible behavior gets rewarded, and she receives all the credit for solving the mystery and even gets a day named after her. Even though Norville, Daphne, and even Fred did most of the work. It doesn't work as an origin story, and it certainly doesn't work as a Scooby-Doo story. There is no progression, no character growth. And even if you're able to overlook some of the issues I mentioned in this video, there are much better cartoons designed for adult audiences than Velma. Cartoons that actually respect their audiences and know what kind of story they want to tell. Why watch a show that doesn't seem to know what it wants to be, or even who is its target audience? Why watch a show if at the end of it, all the progress never mattered and the characters are going to go back to status quo? I tried to give Velma a fair chance at proving that it can be something more than just the internet's newest scapegoat. I tried to watch it with an open mind and see if it has something to offer to the viewers. Unfortunately, there are simply not that many good things that can be said about this show, and while the overwhelmingly negative response it received feels a little blown out of proportion, it isn't entirely unearned, especially if you are judging only the first 2 episodes. If you want to watch an actually good adult animation, you should check out Harley Quinn the animated series, BoJack Horseman, or The Inside Job. All 3 of these shows are praised for their humor, compelling characters, and well-written conflicts. I had a lot of fun watching all 3 of them, and they are a good representation of what adult animation nowadays should aspire to be. It's been confirmed that the 2nd season of Velma is in the works, and at this time I'm honestly not sure if I'm going to watch it or not. There are so many better titles that don't get even a fraction of attention that Velma did, and I would rather prefer to focus on them going forward. Thank you for watching. As always, I am so grateful to see this channel grow and to hear that my opinions resonate with you guys. If you want to see more videos like this one, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to ring that bell. I'm trying to be more consistent with my posting schedule, but it's kind of a work in progress, so please bear with me. I would love to hear your thoughts about Velma in the comments section below. I'm always blown away by all the insightful things that you guys have to say. Again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time!